Hello everyone, and welcome back to the channel. I'm so glad you're here to join us for another journey into the world of storytelling. If you enjoy these tales, please consider hitting that subscribe button and let us know in the comments where you re-listening from today. Now settle in, get comfortable, and let's begin our story. Trapped in Nature, Survival of the Lost Wanderer. Elias Thorne, a man whose life revolved around the click of a camera and the rustle of leaves beneath hiking boots, had always considered himself an expert navigator. The wilderness to him was not a challenge to be overcome, but a canvas to be captured. His latest expedition took him deep into the uncharted territories of the Blackwood Peaks, a region known more for its ancient folklore than its marked trails. He sought the elusive, whispering falls, a cascade rumored to hum with a forgotten melody, a sound he was determined to record and photograph. The morning had dawned crisp and clear, a perfect sapphire sky framing the jagged silhouettes of the mountains. Elias, with his state-of-the-art gear, a sturdy backpack laden with provisions for a week, and an unshakable confidence, set off from the last known outpost. He had meticulously studied topographic maps, cross-referencing them with satellite imagery. His compass, a gift from his late grandfather, was a relic of precision. What could possibly go wrong? Hours turned into a rhythmic trek. The air grew thicker with the scent of pine and damp earth. Sunlight dappled through the canopy, painting shifting patterns on the forest floor. He was deeper than he had ever been, and the silence was profound, broken only by the crunch of his boots and the distant cry of a hawk. He found the preliminary markers he had noted, a gnarled oak, a distinctive rock formation, confirming his path. But then a subtle deviation. He spotted a rare species of orchid, its vibrant petals a startling splash against the verdant undergrowth, a photo opportunity too good to miss. He veered off the faint game trail he'd been following, just for a moment, to get a better angle. One moment stretched into two into 10. He got the shot, a masterpiece of natural beauty. But when he looked up, the familiar game trail had vanished. The forest seemed to have swallowed it whole. He spun around, trying to retrace his steps, but the dense foliage offered no clear path. Panic, a cold, unfamiliar sensation, began to prickle at the edges of his calm. He checked his compass. It spun wildly, then settled, pointing north. But which north? The north he remembered, or a new, disorienting north conjured by the ancient magnetic pull of the mountains. He pulled out his GPS, a device that had never failed him. Searching for signal, it blinked mockingly. The towering peaks and dense canopy were jamming it. Elias tried to maintain composure. He was a survivor. He had skills. He took a deep breath, trying to recall his training. Rule number 1, don't panic. He decided to head east, reasoning that eventually he would hit the river, which flowed south toward civilization. The sun was still high, offering a rough directional guide. He pushed through thickets, over fallen logs, the wilderness closing in around him, no longer a canvas, but a formidable opponent. The light began to dim, casting long, eerie shadows. The cheerful chirping of birds gave way to the rustling of unseen creatures. He realized with a chilling certainty that he was truly, utterly lost. The Whispering Falls were no longer his destination. Survival was. The wilderness, once his muse, had become his trap. He had wandered too far, taken one too many risks, and now he was paying the price. The night was coming, and with it, the true test of his resolve. He had to find shelter, and fast. The temperature was dropping, and the raw, untamed sounds of the forest were growing louder, more menacing. The encroaching darkness brought with it a palpable chill, a stark contrast to the mild afternoon. Elias, his heart thrumming a frantic rhythm against his ribs, stumbled through the deepening gloom. Every rustle of leaves, every distant hoot of an owl, sounded amplified, sinister. He knew the first night was critical. Exposure was a silent killer, as deadly as any predator. He needed shelter, any shelter that could offer a modicum of protection from the elements and the unseen eyes of the forest. He spotted a large, ancient oak with a hollowed-out base, a natural den. It wasn't perfect, but it was better than nothing. He quickly cleared out the damp leaves and debris, fashioning a crude barrier of fallen branches across the opening. Inside, the air was still, earthy, and offered a faint sense of security. He unrolled his sleeping bag, a high-tech marvel designed for sub-zero temperatures, and crawled inside. The warmth was a small comfort, but it couldn't quell the gnawing anxiety in his stomach. He tried to eat, but the energy bar tasted like sawdust. His mind raced, replaying the day's events, searching for the exact moment he had gone wrong. The orchid. That beautiful, deceptive flower. A fleeting distraction that had led him astray. He chastised himself, a seasoned outdoorsman making such a rookie mistake. His grandfather's voice echoed in his memory. Nature demands respect, Elias. Never assume you know her ways. He felt a pang of shame. Sleep was elusive. Every creak of the tree, every distant howl, sent a jolt of adrenaline through him. He imagined eyes watching him from the darkness, the forest breathing around him. He felt utterly alone, a tiny speck in a vast, indifferent world. The sheer scale of the wilderness, once a source of awe, now felt crushing. He thought of his cozy apartment, the hum of the city, the familiar faces of friends. A wave of homesickness, raw and potent, washed over him. He pulled out his satellite phone, knowing it was likely useless, but hoping for a miracle. No signal. The screen remained blank, a dark mirror reflecting his own desperate face. He tried to conserve its battery, knowing it might be his last link to the outside world, however tenuous. He also checked his water supply. He had a liter bottle, half full. Not enough for tomorrow, especially if he couldn't find a source. He knew dehydration could set in quickly, clouding judgment and weakening the body. His training kicked in, overriding the panic. He needed to be rational, systematic. Survival meant water, shelter, food, and signaling. Shelter was temporary. Water was next. He remembered seeing a small stream earlier in the day before he'd gone off track. Could he find it again? The thought of retracing his steps in the dark was ludicrous, dangerous. He would wait for dawn. The night dragged on, an eternity of cold dread and fragmented sleep. He dreamt of city lights, of his bed, of a warm meal. He woke with a jolt, unsure if the sound he'd heard was real or part of a nightmare. A low growl, perhaps? Or just the wind? He clutched his multi-tool, its cool metal, a small, inadequate comfort. He yearned for the first sliver of light, for the promise of a new day, however daunting it might be. The first faint streaks of dawn were a welcome sight, painting the eastern sky in hues of soft gray and pale rose. Elias emerged from his makeshift shelter, stiff and sore, but with a renewed sense of purpose. The fear of the night had receded, replaced by the immediate, pressing needs of survival. Thirst was now a constant, irritating companion, a dry rasp at the back of his throat. He checked his backpack. What little water he had left was warm and tasted metallic. He knew he couldn't last long without a fresh source. His priority was clear: find water. He remembered the general direction of the stream he had seen, or thought he had seen, the previous day. He decided to head downhill, reasoning that water always flows to the lowest point. He packed his meager belongings, leaving the hollowed-out oak behind, a silent testament to his first night lost. The forest in daylight seemed less menacing, but no less formidable. The sheer density of the trees, the tangle of undergrowth, made progress slow and arduous. He had to constantly push aside branches, step over roots, and navigate around fallen logs. The air grew humid as the sun climbed higher, intensifying his thirst. His throat felt parched, his lips cracked. He started to feel lightheaded. He tried to conserve energy, moving at a steady, deliberate pace. He scanned the ground for signs of animal trails, which often led to water sources. He listened intently for the sound of running water, but the forest was mostly silent, save for the buzz of insects and the distant calls of birds. Each step was a test of endurance, both physical and mental. Doubt began to creep back in. What if he was going in the wrong direction? What if the stream had dried up? He stumbled upon a patch of wild berries, small and dark. He recognized them as safe to eat, a small victory. He carefully picked a handful, savoring their tart sweetness, which offered a momentary burst of energy and moisture. But it was not enough. His body craved water. He knew the dangers of drinking untreated water, but the thought of dehydration was becoming more terrifying than the risk of parasites. He remembered a trick from a survival manual. Look for moss growing predominantly on one side of trees, north in the northern hemisphere. He tried to apply this, but the dense canopy made it difficult to discern clear patterns. The forest was playing tricks on his senses, disorienting him further. He felt a growing sense of desperation. His mind drifted to memories of clean tap water, of ice-cold drinks, of long showers. Simple luxuries he had taken for granted. He promised himself that if he ever got out of this, he would never look at a glass of water the same way again. The thought fueled him, a desperate hope against the encroaching despair. Just as his resolve began to waver, he heard it, a faint trickling sound. He froze, straining his ears. It was barely audible, but it was there. Hope surged through him, a powerful adrenaline rush. He pushed forward with renewed vigor, scrambling over rocks and through thorny bushes, following the elusive sound. The trickling grew louder, clearer. He saw a flash of silver between the trees. A stream. A glorious, life-saving stream. He quickened his pace, his chest heaving, his legs burning, driven by the primal urge for water. He had found it. He drank until his stomach ached, then splashed water on his face, washing away the grime and sweat. This was not just water. It was life itself. After slaking his thirst, a wave of weariness washed over him. He sat by the stream, his legs stretched out, simply listening to the soothing gurgle of the water. The immediate crisis of thirst was averted, allowing his mind a moment of respite from the relentless pressure of survival. He took out his water filter, a small hand-pump device, and began to fill his bottle, ensuring he had a clean supply for later. This small act of preparedness brought a semblance of control back to his chaotic situation. He also took the opportunity to inspect his feet. Blisters, angry red and forming, were appearing on his heels and toes. His boots, though sturdy, were not designed for days of relentless off-trail trekking. He carefully removed his socks, cleaned his feet in the stream, and applied the few bandages he had. He knew foot care was paramount in a survival situation. An infection could quickly become debilitating. As he rested, he began to observe his surroundings with a keen, analytical eye. The stream flowed roughly south-southwest, a promising direction. Following a water source was often the safest bet in unfamiliar terrain. He also noticed various types of plant life along the banks, some he recognized from his foraging guides. He spotted wild sorrel, its distinctive leaves promising a tangy, edible green. He carefully gathered a handful, a small addition to his dwindling rations. The sun, now high above, filtered through the canopy, creating dancing patterns of light and shadow on the water. Birds chirped in the branches, their melodies a stark contrast to the ominous sounds of the previous night. For a brief period, he allowed himself to relax, to appreciate the raw beauty of the wilderness, even as it held him captive. He wasn't out of danger, not by a long shot, but this moment of peace, this small victory, recharged his spirit. He thought about his family, his friends. They would be worried, undoubtedly. He pictured the search parties that would surely be organized, the anxious faces. The thought spurred him on, reminding him of what he was fighting for. He wasn't just surviving for himself. He was surviving to get back to them, This resolve hardened his gaze. He spent a good hour by the stream, resting, hydrating, and mentally mapping out his next steps. His plan was simple: follow the stream downstream. It was the most logical course of action, offering a continuous water source and eventually, he hoped, leading him to a larger river or, even better, a road or a trail. He still had some food left, though it was diminishing rapidly. He needed to start thinking about more sustainable foraging or even hunting, though he had no weapons. The wilderness had already taught him a harsh lesson in humility. He had come here seeking beauty, and he had found it, but he had also found its brutal, unforgiving side. As he finally rose, feeling a little stronger, a little more clear-headed, he knew his journey was far from over. But he had faced the first night, found water, and for now, that was enough. He took one last long drink, filled his bottle, and began his careful trek along the stream's winding path. Following the stream proved to be more challenging than Elias had anticipated. What appeared on the map as a clear, winding line was, in reality, a tangled mess of fallen trees, dense thickets, and sheer rock faces. The stream itself often disappeared underground, forcing him to climb steep banks and then descend again, always searching for the telltale sound of flowing water. His progress was painstakingly slow, each step a deliberate effort to avoid twisting an ankle or slipping on treacherous moss-covered stones. Constant battle against the terrain began to wear him down. His muscles ached, his clothes were torn, and his once sturdy boots were now waterlogged and heavy. The sun, filtered through the thick canopy, offered little warmth, and the air grew increasingly damp and cool as he descended deeper into what felt like an ancient, untouched part of the forest. He wondered if anyone had ever set foot here before him. He saw no signs of human presence, no discarded wrappers, no faint trail, not even a broken branch that suggested a previous passage. The isolation was profound. Days blurred into a monotonous cycle of walking, searching for food, resting, and trying to keep his spirits up. His initial supply of food was gone, consumed piece by piece to fuel his weary body. He relied solely on foraging now, carefully identifying berries, edible leaves, and the occasional mushroom. Each successful find was a small triumph, a testament to his growing understanding of this unforgiving environment. He became acutely aware of the subtle nuances of the forest, the different bird calls, the faint scent of animal trails, the types of trees that indicated higher or lower ground one afternoon. While navigating a particularly dense section, he heard a rustling in the undergrowth closer than he liked. He froze, his heart pounding. A large buck, its antlers majestic and imposing, emerged from the trees, paused, and then bounded away. The encounter, though brief and non-threatening, served as a stark reminder that he was not alone in this wilderness, and he was far from the top of the food chain. The forest had its own inhabitants, and he was merely a visitor, an intruder even. He found himself talking to himself, a low murmur of encouragement, a recounting of the day's events, anything to break the silence. He thought of past adventures, of moments of triumph and failure, of the comfort of human connection. The mental battle was as exhausting as the physical one. He fought off despair with sheer willpower, focusing on the next step, the next edible plant, the next bend in the stream. He started building small cairns of stones whenever the stream disappeared or the path became particularly confusing. These tiny markers, though for his eyes only, gave him a sense of accomplishment and control. They were his breadcrumbs in this vast green labyrinth. He was adapting, slowly but surely, shedding the layers of his urban life and embracing the primal instincts of survival. He learned to read the sky, to predict the weather by the behavior of animals, to find comfort in the rhythm of the forest. As the fifth night approached, Elias found a shallow cave a more substantial shelter than his previous makeshift ones. He gathered dry leaves and twigs, starting a small, smoky fire with his furrow rod. The warmth and light were immensely comforting, a tiny beacon in the overwhelming darkness. He cooked the few foraged items he had, their earthy taste a welcome change from raw berries. He huddled by the fire, watching the flames dance, and for the first time in days, he felt a flicker of something more than just survival instinct. He felt a strange, nascent connection to this wild, beautiful, and dangerous place. Days bled into weeks. The concept of time, once dictated by clocks and calendars, now stretched and compressed, marked only by the rising and setting of the sun, the hunger in his belly, and the constant ache in his limbs. Elias was thinner, his face gaunt, a beard growing wild and untamed, but his eyes held a new sharpness, an intensity born of constant vigilance. He had shed the last vestiges of his city self, becoming a creature of instinct and observation. His backpack, once heavy with sophisticated gear, was now mostly empty save for a few essential items. His water filter, a ferro rod for fire, his broken compass, and a tattered map that was more a comfort than a guide. He had learned to move with a quiet efficiency, his senses heightened, his steps silent. He could identify dozens of edible plants, track small animals, and predict changes in weather with surprising accuracy. He had even managed to fashion a crude spear from a sturdy branch, though he hadn't yet had the opportunity or the heart to use it. One afternoon, while following the stream, which had now widened into a small river, he stumbled upon something that jolted him out of his primal focus, a series of old, hand-carved symbols on a cluster of ancient rocks. They were weathered and faint, almost swallowed by moss, but undeniably man-made. They depicted abstract shapes, perhaps animals, perhaps celestial bodies, certainly not modern. A shiver ran down his spine. He wasn't the first human to be lost here, nor the first to wander these ancient woods. The discovery sparked a new kind of curiosity, a break from the relentless cycle of survival. Who had made these? How long ago? Were they a warning? A guide? He spent hours tracing the lines with his fingers, trying to decipher their meaning. The symbols seemed to whisper tales of forgotten peoples, of rituals performed under the same vast canopy that now sheltered him. It was a profound connection to a past he never knew existed. The river, too, seemed to hold secrets. It flowed through deep gorges, carved over millennia, revealing layers of rock that told geological stories. Elias found himself studying these formations, recognizing the passage of time, feeling utterly insignificant yet profoundly connected to something much larger than himself. The wilderness was not just a trap. It was a living, breathing history book. He continued downstream, but now with a subtle shift in his mental landscape. He wasn't just trying to escape. He was also exploring, learning, connecting. The symbols had opened a door in his mind, reminding him that even in the deepest wilderness, humanity had left its mark. Could these marks lead him somewhere? Could they be a clue? He pressed on, fueled by a renewed sense of purpose, a blend of survival and archaeological intrigue. The sun began its descent, painting the sky in fiery oranges and purples, a spectacle Elias now appreciated with a raw, primal gratitude. He found a small, sheltered alcove near the riverbank, a perfect spot to make camp. As he started his fire, he looked at the river, wondering what other secrets it held, what other whispers of the past would emerge from its depths. He felt a strange sense of companionship with the ancient carvers, fellow wanderers in this timeless forest. He was still lost, still in danger, but he was also, in a profound way, found. The ancient symbols became Elias's new compass. He meticulously scanned riverbanks and rock faces, searching for more carvings, hoping they formed a trail, a forgotten route through the wilderness. His eyes, trained by days of survival, were now adept at spotting the faintest marks, the subtle anomalies in the natural landscape. His progress, though still slow, felt more purposeful, guided by an invisible hand from the distant past. One morning, after a particularly cold night, he found a series of symbols carved into a fallen log, pointing away from the river towards a dense thicket of pines. Hesitantly, he decided to follow. The river had been a reliable guide, but it was also a slow and winding one. Perhaps the ancient path offered a shortcut, a more direct route through the mountains. He pushed through the pines, the ground beneath his feet surprisingly soft and yielding. After a few hundred yards, the trees thinned slightly, and he saw it, a faint indentation in the earth, barely discernible, but unmistakably a path. It was overgrown with moss and ferns, almost swallowed by the forest, but it was there, a track. Perhaps centuries old, maintained only by the passage of time and the memory of those who had once walked it. A surge of excitement, raw and exhilarating, coursed through him. This was more than just a direction. It was a tangible link to human presence. He followed the path, his pace quickening, his senses alert. The path wound its way uphill, away from the river, through groves of towering cedars and ancient oaks. It was arduous, but the hope it instilled was a powerful motivator. As he walked, he noticed subtle signs that this was indeed a path, not just a game trail. Some rocks seemed deliberately placed, creating crude steps up a steep incline. A few smaller trees had been cut or broken long ago to clear the way. He even found a small, smooth stone, clearly shaped by human hands, lying half buried in the dirt. It was a tool, perhaps, or a forgotten trinket. He picked it up, feeling its cool weight in his palm, a tangible connection to the people who had once traversed this very route. The path led him through landscapes he hadn't yet encountered, open clearings bathed in sunlight, where wild flowers bloomed in profusion, and then back into shadowed valleys, cool and damp. He felt a strange sense of companionship, as if the spirits of the ancient wanderers were guiding his steps. He imagined them, perhaps hunters, perhaps traders, making their way through this same wilderness, facing similar challenges. He found a small, sheltered overhang, clearly used before, with a faint circle of blackened stones. It was an ancient campsite. He decided to stay there for the night, feeling a profound sense of connection to those who had warmed themselves by a fire in the exact same spot, perhaps hundreds of years ago. He built his own fire, a small, controlled blaze, and as the flames danced, he felt a strange sense of peace. He was still lost, still alone, but he was no longer adrift. He had found a thread, however thin, that connected him to humanity, a whisper of a way out. The forest, which had felt like a prison, now felt like a vast, ancient library, slowly revealing its secrets. Elias woke to a sky bruised with heavy, charcoal gray clouds. The air was thick and still, pregnant with an impending storm. The faint path he had been following, his thread of hope, was suddenly overshadowed by the looming threat of severe weather. He knew mountain storms could be brutal, turning an already treacherous landscape into a death trap. He packed his meager belongings with urgency, his heart pounding with a familiar anxiety. He tried to move quickly, but the path, steep and winding, offered little opportunity for speed. The wind began to pick up, rustling through the trees with an ominous hiss. The first drops of rain fell, large and heavy, splattering on the leaves. Within minutes, the drizzle turned into a torrential downpour. The sky opened up, unleashing a deluge that instantly soaked him to the bone. The path, already slippery with moss and damp earth, became a muddy, treacherous slide. He struggled to maintain his footing, his boots sinking into the saturated ground. The visibility dropped dramatically, the rain a thick curtain obscuring everything beyond a few feet. Thunder rumbled in the distance, a deep, guttural growl that shook the very ground beneath his feet. Lightning flashed, momentarily illuminating the terrifying grandeur of the storm-lashed forest. He knew he couldn't continue on the path. The risk of a fall, or worse, a flash flood, was too great. He needed shelter, and fast. He scanned his surroundings desperately, but the dense forest offered no obvious refuge. The wind howled through the trees, tearing at the branches, some of which snapped and crashed to the ground with sickening thuds. He pressed himself against the base of a massive, old-growth tree, hoping its thick trunk would offer some protection. The cold was intense, seeping into his bones. Shivering violently, he realized hypothermia was a real and immediate danger. His clothes, designed for hiking, not for a prolonged deluge, were saturated. He tried to think, to remember his training, but the roar of the storm and the chattering of his teeth made coherent thought difficult. He remembered a basic survival principle: stay dry, stay warm. But how? He spotted a small overhang in a rock face, barely big enough to crouch under, but it was something. Scrambling towards it, he slipped, tumbling down a short, muddy incline, landing hard against a root. A sharp pain shot through his ankle. He cried out, a guttural sound lost in the storm's fury. He lay there for a moment, winded and in agony, his hopes plummeting. His ankle throbbed, a dull, insistent pain that made standing almost impossible. He dragged himself to the meager shelter, pulling his backpack in after him. He unwrapped his emergency blanket, a thin, reflective sheet, and wrapped it tightly around himself. It offered little warmth against the biting cold, but it was better than nothing. The rain continued to lash down, drumming a relentless rhythm on the forest floor. He was trapped again, not by the wilderness itself, but by its sudden, violent fury, and now by his own injured body. The ancient path, his beacon of hope, was now miles behind him, and the storm raged on, testing his resolve to its absolute limits. The storm eventually subsided, leaving behind a drenched, dripping forest and a lingering chill. Elias, however, was in a new kind of hell. His ankle was swollen, hot to the touch, and exquisitely painful. Every movement sent searing agony through his leg. He knew with a sinking feeling that his mobility was severely compromised. His greatest asset, his ability to move, to cover ground, was now gone. Despair, a heavy, suffocating blanket, descended upon him. He was injured, alone, and deep in an unforgiving wilderness. How would he walk? How would he forage? How would he escape? The questions hammered at him, relentless and unforgiving. He tried to rationalize, to think of solutions, but his mind felt sluggish, clouded by pain and hopelessness. He spent the rest of the day huddled under the rock overhang, unable to do much more than nurse his throbbing ankle. He carefully removed his boot and sock, revealing a severely bruised and swollen joint. He knew he needed to immobilize it, but he had no splinting materials, no medical supplies beyond a few small bandages. He tried to fashion a makeshift brace from a sturdy branch and some strips of cloth torn from his shirt, but it was clumsy and offered little support. The cold, damp air seeped into his bones, and he shivered uncontrollably. He tried to start a fire, but all the wood was soaked, and his furrow rod, usually reliable, only produced weak sparks that quickly died in the damp kindling. The frustration was immense, adding to his already overwhelming sense of defeat. He was cold, in pain, and utterly helpless. He closed his eyes, picturing his life before. The warmth of his home, the easy availability of medical care, the simple luxury of a painkiller. He felt a profound sense of regret for having taken such risks, for venturing so far beyond the boundaries of safety. He thought of his loved ones, imagining their worry. The thought was a double-edged sword. It fueled his desire to survive, but it also intensified his guilt and despair. As darkness fell, the sounds of the forest returned, no longer just ominous but threatening. He felt vulnerable, exposed. He was a wounded animal, easy prey. He huddled deeper into his emergency blanket, clutching his crude spear, his eyes scanning the inky blackness beyond his meager shelter. Sleep was impossible, punctuated only by waves of pain and the chilling realization of his predicament. He realized he had reached a new low. His physical strength was failing, and his mental fortitude was being tested like never before. He had to find a way to move, even slowly. He had to keep fighting. He thought of the ancient path, his glimpse of hope, now seemingly unreachable. He couldn't give up, not now. He had come too far. He had to find a way to move forward, even if it meant crawling. The wilderness had dealt him a brutal blow, but he would not surrender. He would survive this, he vowed, even if it meant enduring unimaginable pain and pushing his body beyond its limits. He would find a way out. The morning brought no immediate relief to Elias's ankle, but it did bring a renewed sense of clarity. Despair, while powerful, could not be his master. He had to think, to innovate. Lying still would only ensure his demise. He needed to move, however slowly, however painfully. His immediate goal, find a way to support his injured leg. He scanned his surroundings, his gaze falling upon a fallen sapling about an inch thick and remarkably straight. An idea sparked. Using his multi-tool, he carefully sawed off 2 sections, each about a foot long. With the remaining strips of cloth from his shirt, he painstakingly bound the sapling sections to either side of his ankle, creating a rudimentary splint. It was far from perfect, but it offered some stability, enough to prevent the joint from twisting further. The next challenge was mobility. He couldn't put weight on his injured foot. He needed a crutch. He found a stronger, thicker branch about his height and began to trim it, clearing away smaller branches and rough edges. It was a slow, agonizing process, but with each cut, a sense of purpose returned. This was survival, stripped down to its most basic form, problem-solving with the few resources available. By late morning, he had a functional, albeit crude, crutch. Standing for the first time with its support was a revelation. Pain still shot up his leg, but the crutch took some of the weight, allowing him to hobble forward, one agonizing step at a time. His progress was painstakingly slow, perhaps 100 yards an hour, but it was progress. He was moving. He was fighting back. He decided to try and retrace his steps back to the ancient path. It was a gamble, but he remembered the general direction, and the thought of an established route, however overgrown, was more appealing than blindly pushing through virgin forest. He carefully scanned the ground, looking for any familiar landmarks, any signs of his earlier passage. The sun, now shining brightly, warmed his skin, a welcome sensation after the cold, damp night. He found a patch of dry leaves and managed to coax a small fire to life with his ferro rod. The warmth was a powerful morale booster, and he used the opportunity to dry his socks and warm his hands. He even found a few edible roots, which he roasted in the embers, their earthy taste a small comfort. As he ate, he reflected on the past few days. He had faced down panic, thirst, the fury of a storm, and now a debilitating injury. Each challenge had stripped away a layer of his old self, revealing a core of resilience he hadn't known he possessed. He was no longer just a hiker with a camera. He was a survivor, a primal being fighting for every breath. The thought spurred him on. He would not let this wilderness claim him. He would crawl, he would hobble, he would drag himself if he had to, but he would find his way out. The forest was vast, but he was stubborn. He took a deep, shaky breath, extinguished his fire, and with a grim determination etched on his face, he began his slow, painful journey back towards the hope of the ancient path, one laborious step at a time. The flicker of ingenuity had ignited a new flame of hope within him. The journey back to the ancient path was a test of pure endurance. Every step was a battle against excruciating pain, exhaustion, and the insidious whispers of doubt. Elias pushed through dense undergrowth, carefully navigated slippery slopes, and dragged himself over fallen logs, his makeshift crutch digging into the earth with each laborious swing. The splint on his ankle, while crude, prevented further injury, but the constant pressure and movement made his leg throb relentlessly. Days blurred into a monotonous rhythm of pain, slow progress, and meager sustenance. He learned to identify the most nutritious plants, to track small game with increasing skill, though he still hadn't managed to catch anything substantial. His body was a machine of survival, lean and efficient, his mind a fortress against despair. He talked to himself constantly, a running commentary of encouragement, strategy, and even jokes, anything to keep the silence from consuming him. One afternoon, as the sun began its gentle descent, painting the western sky in hues of orange and purple, Elias hobbled over a small ridge. Below him, partially obscured by a stand of ancient pines, he saw it. The faint, almost invisible line in the forest floor, the subtle signs of deliberately placed stones, the familiar energy of the ancient path. A wave of profound relief washed over him, so potent it almost brought him to his knees. He had found it, his beacon of hope. It wasn't a rescue, not yet, but it was a tangible step forward. The path represented direction, a link to the past, and a potential route to the future. He descended the ridge, his crutch digging into the soft earth, his heart soaring with a renewed sense of purpose. He felt a surge of gratitude for the ancient peoples who had forged this route, their memory now a lifeline for him. He decided to make camp right on the path, a symbolic reclaiming of his journey. He found a dry spot under a cluster of towering cedars and, with practiced ease, started a small fire. The dancing flames seemed brighter, more comforting tonight, reflecting the rekindled hope in his eyes. He carefully examined his ankle. The swelling had gone down slightly, but it was still tender and painful. He knew it would be a long time before he could walk normally again, but at least he was on a path. As he huddled by the fire, eating a handful of foraged berries and roots, Elias allowed himself to dream of rescue, of hot food, of clean clothes, of soft beds. These were not fantasies of escape anymore, but tangible goals, motivators that pushed him forward. He was no longer just surviving. He was actively seeking his way out. The wilderness had tried to break him, to swallow him whole, but he had refused. He had adapted, endured, and found a way to fight back. The ancient path, once a mere curiosity, was now his sole focus, his guiding star. He knew it would be a long, arduous journey, but he was no longer lost in a labyrinth. He was on a defined route, however faint, however challenging. The wilderness still held its dangers, but Elias had found a glimmer of hope, a fragile thread leading him towards the promise of civilization. He would follow it, one painful step at a time, until he was free. The ancient path led Elias deeper into the heart of the mountains, often winding along treacherous ledges and through narrow gorges. His crutch became an extension of his body, testing every rock and root before he committed his weight. The pain in his ankle was a constant companion, a dull throb that flared with every misstep, but he had learned to compartmentalize it, to push it to the background of his consciousness. The path, while providing direction, was far from easy. It descended into a deep, shadowed gorge where the air grew damp and cold, and the sunlight rarely penetrated. Towering cliffs rose on either side, their faces scarred with ancient striations, making him feel like an ant crawling along the bottom of the world. A small, furious river, born from melting snows, carved its way through the gorge, its roar echoing off the stone walls. He had to cross this river. It was too wide to jump, too deep to wade without being swept away. The ancient path, however, offered a solution. Ahead, he saw the remnants of what looked like an old, fallen tree, its trunk spanning the narrowest part of the gorge, forming a precarious natural bridge. It was old, weathered, and covered in slippery moss, but it was his only option. Fear, cold and sharp, gripped him. The drop below was dizzying, the river a churning chaos of white water and jagged rocks. One slip, one moment of imbalance, and it would be over. He took a deep breath, trying to steady his trembling hands. He remembered his grandfather's words about facing fear. Acknowledge it, then put it aside. It serves no purpose in action. With painstaking care, Elias began to traverse the fallen log. He moved on his hands and knees, his crutch strapped to his back, inching his way across the slick, uneven surface. The wind funneled through the gorge, tried to buffet him, and the roar of the river below seemed to mock his slow progress. Every muscle in his body was tense, every nerve on high alert. His injured ankle screamed in protest, but he forced himself to focus, to concentrate solely on the next handhold, the next inch forward not midway across. A gust of wind stronger than the rest hit him, almost dislodging him. His heart leaped into his throat. He clung to the log, pressing his face against the rough bark, his eyes squeezed shut. He waited for the gust to pass, his body rigid with terror. Slowly, carefully, he opened his eyes and resumed his agonizing crawl. The crossing felt like an eternity. His arms and legs burned with effort. Finally, after what seemed like hours, he reached the other side, collapsing onto the rocky bank, gasping for breath. He lay there for a long time, the adrenaline slowly receding, leaving him weak and shaking. He had faced a profound fear and emerged victorious. The path continued up the other side of the gorge, a steep climb that promised to be equally challenging. But as he looked back at the roaring river and the treacherous log, a sense of immense pride swelled within him. He had done it. He had faced the gorge, and he had survived. The wilderness continued to test him, but with each challenge overcome, he felt his resolve harden, his spirit grow stronger. He was no longer just a wanderer. He was a warrior. Emerging from the depths of the gorge, Elias found the ancient path leading him upward, through a landscape that gradually began to change. The dense shadowed forests gave way to more open, rocky terrain, dotted with resilient pines and hardy shrubs. The air, though still crisp, felt subtly different, carrying a faint, almost imperceptible scent that tugged at the edges of his memory. He couldn't quite place it at first. It was a faint, acrid smell, mixed with something earthy. He paused, inhaling deeply, trying to identify the elusive scent. Then it clicked. Smoke. Not the clean, woody smell of his own small campfires, but a different kind of smoke. Distant, faint, but unmistakably the smell of a larger, ongoing fire, perhaps from a chimney. It was a human scent. A jolt of adrenaline, sharper and more potent than any fear, shot through him. Civilization, a real, undeniable sign of human presence. He hadn't seen or smelled anything like it in weeks. His heart began to pound, not from exertion or fear, but from a burgeoning, overwhelming hope. He wasn't just following an ancient path. He was following the son of humanity. He pressed on, his crutch finding a new rhythm, his injured ankle almost forgotten in the surge of excitement. The path became a little clearer here, less overgrown, as if it had been used more recently, or perhaps was closer to an area of human activity. He scanned the horizon, searching for any visual confirmation, but the undulating landscape and the remaining tree cover still obscured his view. The scent grew stronger, more defined. He could now discern hints of burning wood, perhaps even a faint trace of something cooking. His stomach rumbled violently, reminding him of the bland roots and berries that had sustained him. The thought of a warm meal, a proper meal, was almost unbearable in its allure. He imagined people talking, laughing, living their lives, completely unaware of the solitary, desperate figure inching closer through the wilderness. He felt a strange mix of emotions, overwhelming relief, but also a twinge of apprehension. How would he look? What would he say? He had been so immersed in the primal world of survival that the thought of re-entering society felt almost alien. He found himself talking aloud again, but this time not to himself, but as if addressing unseen people. "Hello? Is anyone there?" His voice was hoarse, unused to anything beyond whispers and grunts. He tried to shout, but it came out as a weak croak. He realized how much his voice had changed, how much he had changed. The sun was beginning to dip below the western peaks, casting long golden shadows across the landscape. Elias knew he had to keep moving. He couldn't risk losing the scent or the light. He pushed himself harder than he had in days, fueled by the intoxicating promise of rescue. He was no longer just a lost wanderer. He was a homing pigeon, drawn by an irresistible, familiar scent. The path led him down into a shallow valley, and as he descended, the scent became clearer, more distinct. He could almost taste it. He looked ahead, his eyes straining through the fading light, his senses on high alert. He was close. He was so incredibly close. The wilderness had tried its best, but he was winning. He was finally, truly breaking free. As twilight deepened, Elias hobbled down into the small valley, the scent of wood smoke growing stronger with every painful step. His heart hammered against his ribs, a drumbeat of anticipation and disbelief. He pushed through a final thicket of pines, the branches scraping against his tattered clothes, and then he saw it. In a small clearing, nestled at the base of a towering, ancient peak, stood a small, rustic cabin. Smoke curled lazily from its stone chimney, and a faint, warm glow emanated from a window. A dog barked in the distance, a sound that, for the first time in weeks, brought tears to Elias's eyes. It was real. It wasn't a hallucination, not a cruel trick of the wilderness. It was human habitation. He stood there for a long moment, frozen, simply staring at the sight, letting the reality wash over him. The cabin, so simple, so unassuming, represented everything he had fought for: warmth, food, safety, human connection. His journey, his ordeal, was finally nearing its end. With newfound strength, he began to move towards the cabin, his crutch rhythmic against the soft earth. As he drew closer, he could hear faint sounds, the low murmur of voices, the crackle of a fire. He felt a surge of apprehension. What would they think of him? A wild, bearded man, limping out of the forest like a ghost. He reached the edge of the clearing, pausing behind a large cedar, unsure how to announce himself. He didn't want to startle anyone. He took a deep, shaky breath, trying to compose himself, to remember how to speak, how to interact. His voice, when he finally tried to use it, was raspy and weak. "Hello?" He croaked, his voice barely audible above the gentle evening sounds. A moment of silence. Then the cabin door creaked open, and a man, tall and weather-beaten, stepped out, a shotgun held loosely in his hand. He peered into the gloom, his eyes narrowed. "Who's there?" He called out, his voice gruff but not overtly hostile. Elias stepped out from behind the tree, slowly, raising his empty hands in a gesture of peace. "My name is Elias Thorne," he said, his voice stronger now, though still hoarse. "I'm lost. I've been lost for weeks." The man's eyes widened, scanning Elias's gaunt frame, his wild beard, his tattered clothes, and the crude splint on his ankle. He lowered the shotgun slightly. "Lost, you say?" His voice softened, a flicker of understanding in his gaze. "Well, son, you look like you've been through hell and back." He beckoned Elias forward. "Come on in, then. You look like you could use a warm fire and a good meal." Relief, so profound it was almost painful, flooded Elias. He took a hesitant step forward, then another, his crutch sinking into the soft grass. He was no longer alone. He was no longer lost. The wilderness had released its grip, and humanity, in the form of a solitary cabin and a kind stranger, had welcomed him back. The man, who introduced himself as Silas, was a retired park ranger, a solitary figure who had chosen to live off-grid, deep in the mountains, a self-appointed guardian of the wilderness. He led Elias into the cabin, a warm, cozy space filled with the comforting sense of wood smoke, pine, and simmering stew. A large, shaggy dog, the source of the earlier bark, sniffed at Elias's injured leg before wagging its tail tentatively. Silas was a man of few words, but his actions spoke volumes. He immediately set Elias by the roaring stone fireplace, wrapped him in a thick wool blanket, and pressed a steaming mug of herbal tea into his hands. The warmth spread through Elias's chilled body, a sensation he hadn't felt in weeks. He took a tentative sip, the fragrant tea a balm to his raw throat. Then came the stew, a simple, hearty concoction of venison, root vegetables, and wild herbs. Elias ate slowly at first, savoring every mouthful, then with a growing hunger, devouring the bowl Silas refilled twice. It was the most delicious meal he had ever tasted, a feast after weeks of foraging. He felt strength returning to his limbs with every bite. Silas listened patiently as Elias recounted his ordeal, his story spilling out in a torrent of words, of fear, pain, and the relentless struggle for survival. He nodded occasionally, his gaze wise and understanding. He offered no judgment, only quiet empathy. "These mountains," Silas said, his voice low, "they take what they want. But they also teach you things if you listen." He expertly examined Elias's ankle, his callous fingers surprisingly gentle. "Nasty sprain, perhaps a hairline fracture? Nothing's broken, thank God, but you'll be off it for a while. We'll get you some proper rest, and I've got some old remedies that'll help with the swelling." He produced a jar of salve made from local herbs, rubbing it gently into Elias's skin. The care, the simple human kindness, overwhelmed Elias. He hadn't realized how deeply he had craved connection, how much he had missed the touch of another human being. He felt a profound sense of gratitude towards this gruff, solitary man who had offered him sanctuary. Silas explained that the cabin was far off any known trails, accessible only by a difficult, winding path that was barely maintained. He came into contact with the outside world only rarely, mostly through a satellite radio. For the next few days at Silas's cabin were a blur of rest, healing, and profound reflection. Elias's ankle, though still painful, slowly began to mend under Silas's care and the application of his herbal poultices. The warmth of the fire, the regular, nourishing meals, and the simple comfort of a soft bed worked wonders on his emaciated body and frayed nerves. Silas, true to his word, had used his satellite radio to contact the nearest ranger station. They had confirmed that a search party had been out for weeks. Having given up hope after finding no trace of Elias, the news was a stark reminder of how close he had come to being another statistic, another lost wanderer swallowed by the Blackwood Peaks. He felt a pang of guilt for the worry he had caused his family and friends, but also a fierce pride in his own resilience. He spent hours by the fireplace, watching the flames dance, his mind replaying the events of his ordeal. He saw the beauty and the brutality of the wilderness with new eyes. It was no longer just a backdrop for his photographs, but a powerful, living entity that had stripped him bare and then, in its own harsh way, rebuilt him. He recognized the profound lessons it had taught him: humility, patience, resourcefulness, and the incredible strength of the human spirit. He talked to Silas for hours, sharing his experiences, his fears, his moments of despair and triumph. Silas, with his quiet wisdom, listened intently, offering insights gleaned from decades spent in these very mountains. "The wild," Silas mused one evening, stirring the embers, "it holds up a mirror to you. Elias shows you who you really are without all the distractions." Elias agreed. He was no longer the same man who had confidently ventured into the Blackwood Peaks. The experience had carved away his arrogance, refined his priorities, and instilled in him a deep, abiding respect for nature's raw power. He looked at his camera, lying unused in his backpack, and wondered if he would ever see the wilderness through the same lens again. His focus had shifted from capturing its image to understanding its essence. He thought of the ancient symbols, the old path, the whispers of the past. They had been more than just guides. They had been a connection, a reminder that humanity had always navigated this wild world, learning, adapting, surviving. He felt a kinship with those ancient wanderers, a shared understanding of the Earth's immutable truths. The days at the cabin were a period of transition, a bridge between the wild and civilization. He was slowly shedding the primal skin he had grown, preparing to re-enter a world that now seemed impossibly complex and fast-paced. Yet he knew he would carry a piece of the wilderness with him, forever changed by its embrace. He had survived, not just physically, but spiritually. He was no longer just a wanderer. He was a witness, a testament to the raw, untamed beauty and power of nature. A week after Elias's arrival at the cabin, the distant whirring sound of a helicopter broke the serene mountain silence. Elias, still limping but much stronger, stepped out onto the porch with Silas, watching as a small, brightly colored machine descended towards a nearby clearing. It was the ranger. His link to the outside world had arrived. A wave of mixed emotions washed over him. Relief, profound and immediate, that his ordeal was truly over. But also a strange sense of reluctance, a hesitation to leave the quiet sanctuary of Silas's cabin, to re-enter the chaotic world he had left behind. The wilderness, despite its brutality, had become a profound teacher, and leaving it felt like closing a chapter of intense learning. The helicopter landed, kicking up a whirlwind of dust and pine needles. Two figures emerged, clad in familiar ranger uniforms. They approached the cabin, their faces a mix of professional assessment and visible relief. "Elias Thorne?" one of them asked, his voice ringing with authority. Elias nodded, stepping forward. "That's me," the ranger's expression soft. "We had almost given up hope. Your family has been frantic. They're going to be so relieved." The words were a sharp reminder of the world beyond the peaks. The people who had worried, who had grieved for him. A fresh wave of emotion, this time of profound gratitude for his survival and for Silas's help, welled up inside him. After a brief, professional debriefing, where Elias recounted his story in more detail, the rangers turned their attention to Silas. They exchanged knowing nods, a silent understanding passing between them. Silas, it seemed, was a legendary, if reclusive figure in these parts, his wisdom and self-sufficiency well known. "You saved his life, Silas," the ranger said, a genuine warmth in his voice. Silas merely grunted, a small smile playing on his lips. "Just doing what needed to be done." Elias turned to Silas, his heart full. "I don't know how I can ever thank you," he said, his voice thick with emotion. Silas clapped him on the shoulder, a rare gesture of affection. "You already have, Elias, by surviving, by learning. That's thanks enough for an old man." The time for departure had come. Elias gathered his few remaining belongings, his backpack feeling lighter, both literally and figuratively. He took one last look around the cozy cabin, at the crackling fire, at the familiar, comforting presence of Silas. This place, this man, had been his salvation. He shook Silas's hand firmly, a silent promise of future contact, perhaps even a return visit. Then, with a deep breath, he turned and followed the rangers towards the helicopter. As he stepped into the noisy machine, he looked back one last time. Silas stood on the porch, a solitary figure against the vast backdrop of the mountains, a silent sentinel of the wild. Elias knew he would never forget him, or the profound lessons learned in the heart of the Blackwood Peaks. His journey out of the wilderness was complete, but the journey within had just begun. The helicopter ride was a jarring return to the modern world. The rhythmic thump of the rotor blades, the rush of air, and the panoramic view of the vast wilderness shrinking beneath him felt surreal. Elias clutched the satellite phone the rangers had given him, his hands trembling as he dialed his sister's number. Her voice, when she answered, was choked with tears of disbelief and overwhelming relief. The raw emotion of that call, the joy and the anguish, was almost too much to bear. Upon landing at the ranger station, a small crowd had gathered. His family, his sister, his parents, a few close friends, rushed towards him, their faces a mixture of tears and smiles. The embrace was overwhelming, a tidal wave of love and concern that threatened to knock him off his feet. He was hugged, cried over, and questioned all at once. He saw the weeks of worry etched on their faces, and a fresh wave of guilt washed over him. He apologized, tears welling in his own eyes for the pain he had caused. Their relief, however, quickly overshadowed everything else. They stared at him, at his gaunt face, his wild beard, his limping gait, seeing a stranger, and yet, undeniably, their Elias. He was taken to a nearby clinic for a thorough checkup. The doctors confirmed Silas's assessment: a severe sprain, but no major fractures, just extreme dehydration, malnutrition, and exhaustion. He was given clean clothes, a proper meal, and the promise of a long, undisturbed rest. The simple acts of showering, shaving, and putting on fresh clothes felt like a rebirth. As he looked in the mirror, the wild-eyed, bearded stranger was gone, replaced by a man who looked familiar, yet profoundly changed. His eyes, however, still held the intense, watchful gaze of the survivor, a testament to the wilderness he had just emerged from. He spent the next few days recuperating, surrounded by the comfort of his family. He recounted his story countless times, each retelling a way of processing the incredible journey he had undertaken. He spoke of the beauty and brutality of nature, of the ancient path, of the storm, of the injury, and most importantly, of Silas and his unwavering kindness. His family listened with awe and a deep sense of gratitude for his survival. The media, too, caught wind of his story. A lost hiker, presumed dead, emerging from the wilderness after weeks. He was offered interviews, book deals, and even a documentary. But Elias found himself strangely indifferent to the clamor. The accolades felt hollow compared to the profound internal shift he had experienced. He had faced death, stared into the heart of the wild, and come out the other side. That was his true reward. He knew his life would never be the same. The urban world, once his comfort zone, now felt strangely alien, too loud, too fast, too cluttered. He craved the silence of the forest, the simplicity of survival, the raw honesty of nature. He was home, but a part of him remained in the Blackwood Peaks, forever intertwined with the ancient trees and the whispering river. His physical journey was over, but his personal transformation, his rebirth, was just beginning. Months turned into a year in Elias's life, while outwardly resuming a semblance of normalcy, was fundamentally different. His limp was gone, but the lessons of the Blackwood Peaks remained etched in his soul. He still lived in the city, but his heart now beat to a wilder rhythm. He had sold his old apartment, opting for a smaller place with a view of a sprawling city park, a constant reminder of the green world. He returned to the Blackwood Peaks, not as a lost soul, but as a guest. He hiked the ancient path, now partially cleared by rangers who had followed his account. He revisited the deep gorge, the stream where he had first found water, and the very spot where he had injured his ankle. Each place held a memory, a lesson, a ghost of his former self. He found Silas's cabin, and the old ranger greeted him with a knowing smile and a fresh pot of herbal tea. Their reunion was quiet, filled with unspoken understanding. Elias spent days with Silas, learning more about the rhythms of the forest, the art of sustainable living, and the profound wisdom that only solitude in nature can impart. He helped Silas with chores, listened to his stories, and shared his own journey of reintegration. He realized that Silas, in his own way, was a living embodiment of the balance between humanity and the wild, a guide for those who sought to understand. Elias's photography had indeed changed. He no longer chased the perfect, untouched landscape. Instead, he focused on the interplay between humans and nature, on the subtle resilience of life in urban environments, and on the raw beauty of the wilderness he had come to understand so intimately. His work spoke of respect, of interconnectedness, of the enduring power of the natural world, even in the face of human encroachment. He became an eloquent speaker, sharing his story at schools, community centers, and environmental conferences. He spoke not of conquering nature, but of coexisting with it, of listening to its whispers, and of finding one's true self in its embrace. His message resonated deeply, inspiring others to seek their own connection with the wild. Elias Thorne was no longer defined by being lost, but by being found. Found within himself, found within the ancient wisdom of the earth, and found in his renewed purpose to protect the very wilderness that had once held him captive. He understood now that survival wasn't just about escaping. It was about transforming. It was about carrying the wild within, letting its lessons guide every step, every decision. The call of the wild, once a distant siren, was now a constant, comforting hum in his soul. He knew he would always be a wanderer, but now he wandered with purpose, with gratitude, and with a profound understanding that while he had been trapped in nature, he had also, in the most beautiful and brutal way, been set free. His journey was a testament to the enduring spirit of life, a reminder that even in our darkest moments, the wilderness can offer both profound challenge and ultimate liberation.